Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Galactic Armory. My name is Aaron, and with me here we have Jamie again.
Hey, folks.
Today we're going to be doing a Phase 1 Spartan helmet. Now, this is part of our Patreon contest. This isn't going to be a submission or anything, but we thought we'd make a helmet tutorial for you guys to help motivate you or maybe give you some ideas on your own helmet. Now, some details on this contest. It is hosted on the Patreon, so you need to be a member to enter. By the time this video comes out, you have around 2 weeks left to enter into the contest, so we hope this motivates you and gives you some ideas. It has to be a finished Star Wars Halo mashup helmet. Today we're going to be doing the Phase 1 Clone Trooper Spartan mashup.
Now, this video is just to give you an idea of some of the tips and tricks that you can use in your own build to get the best result possible for your own entry.
Right. And we want to say that the winner of this contest is voted on by the Patreon members. It's not our choice or anything like that. And first place is going to win a completely brand new Ender 5 Plus 3D printer. Something that you can print full-sized helmets on in one go, and it's a remarkable printer.
And I believe a lot of people are actually also interested in the second and third place prizes, right?
Right. So second place will get 10 kilograms of their own color of PLA, with third place getting 5 kilograms. There's also a honorable mention that will also get 5 kilograms of PLA, and that's just based on submitting a social media post that has the most likes. If you want to enter into this contest, hop on the Patreon for more details, but let's get started on this helmet. Now, this helmet concept comes from another concept artist named Wernissage. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I think he's German. But he has his own YouTube channel where he mashes up all sorts of different Star Wars and Halo concepts, and so that's right up my alley. I'm very happy to work with him on these helmets. Right now we have about 7 different types of mashups. We have 5 Clone Troopers and 2 versions of the Mando helmet out now. And when you join the Patreon right now, you get access to all 7 of those instantly.
So you're completely spoiled for choice with your competition entry.
That's absolutely right. So, unfortunately, due to a camera SD card failure, we lost a lot of footage of us smoothing out and sanding this helmet.
But you've seen this all before.
Right, we've done dozens of helmet tutorials on smoothing out 3D prints to get them ready for painting. So we're going to call it a happy accident and jump pretty much straight to painting, isn't that right?
Yeah, we're going to channel our inner Bob Ross here and go straight to the fun part.
Yes, the joy. So at this point, the helmet is already pretty much pre-smoothed, all that. What is the first thing you're going to do when we start painting?
Well, the direction that we decided to go was to do a full mashup of the 2 different styles. That is really applying a classic Star Wars aesthetic to this mashup helmet. So that means, like all of our clone helmets, we want to start with a nice, simple white base using a flat white primer. Just get a nice coat all over. And given that these primers often have a opacity level that's quite translucent, you'll probably want to get a good couple coats on just to make sure you get this nice flat white all over. And we like to use a primer so that all of our future paints, airbrushes, oils, and everything like that adhere really well to the base.
It gives you a great starting point for the rest of the colors we're going to be adding to that helmet.
And so that's where the fun comes in. We wanted to figure out something that spoke a little bit of Halo, but it was an aesthetic that we really liked from Star Wars. And of course, we chose the quote unquote Phase 1 Captain, which a lot of people may recognize as very similar to our own beloved Captain Fordo.
That's right. We are bringing him to Halo with this helmet. But we had to make some decisions on how we wanted this paint scheme to look and to actually work with this model, basically. So something fun that I've been doing recently is loading up the 3D model into, I believe it's called 3D Painter. It's basically a freeform paint tool that works on 3D models. And so you can test out different color schemes. We had to kind of pick and choose different paneling that we wanted to make this red. So we did a little bit of experimenting with that before we set in on these other colors.
And so once we're happy with our concept, that's when we start to block out the areas that we want to get right and want to match our reference. So in this case, we want to make sure that the visor brim, I guess what you would call it, is nice flat black. We decided on some panels and some greeblies that really match the aesthetic of the original Phase 1. And so just for the sake of expediency, I will mark those out with masking tape and some saran wrap, and we'll just airbrush this flat black on into 2 or 3 coats just to make sure that we're happy with it. And then with some of the more detailed pieces, I would just paint that on by hand. Again, 2 or 3 thin coats.
Was there a particular reason you started with the black paint as opposed to the red?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that the aesthetic was all there when we started adding more of the specific details. I wanted to make sure that we had the equivalent of a shiny when we started, so that when we started to add our aesthetic detail pieces, our reds in this case, that we knew closer to what the final result would be. We wanted to get as close to a base as possible before we started to add the fun parts. It's less of a practical reason, more of an aesthetic and design choice that allow us to understand what our final result will be before we get there.
It's a lot easier to plan and map out that, yes, this is where we want our reds to go when you have a nice base helmet that's already pretty, recognizable as a clone.
So once everything's mapped out and we're happy with how this aesthetic looks for our final project, that's when I decided to airbrush with a nice darker flat red. In this case, it was a Mephiston red by Citadel that I pre-mixed with some airbrush thinner. I'll get a nice base of that down, and then I'll add a brighter tone of red to hit those middle areas to create a nice gradient, a nice natural light area, which will help catch the eye and create just some visual interest.
Yeah, it really gives a lot of, I want to say, depth to the color.
Yeah, that's what I was going for.
Makes it a lot more interesting.
And given how simple this helmet is, once those reds are added, you're nearly done. That's when you get to choose your own weathering styles and everything. So once we got these nice peelies sorted, we are left with a shiny day one captain, straight out of the officer's mess, ready to start his first day.
Fresh out of the academy. So we're going to be starting some weathering, right? And I asked you to do a light to medium amount of weathering on this. Like, not go too much overboard, but, make him look a little bit battle worn.
Yeah, his first deployment on the Geonosis area of the ring, of the Halo ring. So that's when I decided to just start adding just some light scratches, just the places that paint would wear off first, which would be on flat surfaces and especially corners. So I like to use a sanding sponge in that case, because this airbrush paint is a relatively thin layer. You can peel off these corners in a really nice natural way using a sanding sponge, which will conform to corners and edges and will allow you to just peel away just the weakest areas, and it'll create some nice striation and deeper areas than others. Once I am happy with that more random, I start to get more precise, and I use just a little metal scratching tool here to just precisely add small to medium scratches across the whole surface. And it just creates that natural feel, but also breaks up these flat panels in a really pleasing way.
Gives them a lot of life.
That's right. Quickly. And that's what we're going for. So once we have these scratches down, we get to do probably one of the most satisfying elements of these Halo Mashup helmets, which is the sheer amount of panels that exist on these helmets.
That's where you get a lot of the Halo vibes from.
Yeah, it's a military aesthetic. And so all of these deep crevices and where it looks like a panel has been, bolted on or riveted, that allows you to start adding a lot of depth and really making these individual panels pop. So what I like to use is another Citadel paint, which is their Nuln oil, which is one of their washes, which is just an acrylic black with a lot of paint thinner in it.
Okay. So it works really well at getting into those recessed lines then, I imagine.
That's exactly right. And it'll dry out relatively well, and you'll be satisfied that when it dries, it will leave the exact same amount of black than it looks when it's still wet. So what I do is I like to go around the area first with a thin layer of this Nuln oil. Basically just get the area a little bit wet, and then when you dip the brush in, it'll allow the panel lining fluid to just follow the flow of where the liquid has already been. And so it will fill in the gaps really smoothly.
It'll sort of pull its own paint in.
That's exactly right.
Okay. I do want to talk a little bit about maintaining these panel lines through the sanding and smoothing process. I think a lot of people would be interested to hear that. Even though we don't have footage on it, What did you do to maintain these lines throughout the whole Bondo, throughout the whole resin process?
And that's a great question. That was one thing I tried to make sure to do the whole way through, because it was one of the most desirable elements of these helmets were these distinct, deep panel lines.
And it is very easy to fill those in on accident.
Oh yeah, especially when that's exactly what you're doing. You're trying to fill in a lot of mistakes on 3D printed surfaces, and you don't want to do that to the nice detail, really thin, narrow pieces. So what I do in each of the elements, I started sanding this helmet. When I'm resin coating, when I'm applying Bondo, and when I'm spray painting, I will use a simple toothpick or the edge of a really thin screwdriver, and I will just scrape out those areas and just make sure that there is no distinct buildup in any of those nice thin areas.
You try and do that before any curing happens, before Bondo hardens. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit trickier.
Exactly. Trickier, but not impossible. If you realize that there are some areas with some buildup, just use something that's maybe a little bit sturdier. I actually do recommend a small, machinist's screwdriver. A flathead screwdriver is really good at just getting into these lines and just pulling up any Bondo, any old paint buildup. That will really refine these lines down. And then when you apply your final coats, it'll cover up any maybe rougher parts from that process. But that's a great question and really important to get these nice refined lines.
So we've got our crisp panel lines. What's up next for the weathering process?
So as usual, I like to use my airbrush with some black acrylic.
Yeah.
But I started using a technique to make this potentially more realistic, less animated effect that airbrush can give off, which is I'll apply it into all the edges as usual, but then I will get a tissue with some thinner or some airbrush cleaner on it, and I will push that paint into the corners. I will force it in and wipe it away so that it's left with the sort of dirt and grime that is left behind when someone actually cleans off a helmet or cleans off, a piece of equipment. It's really hard to get into those corners, and they don't have time to get in there, deep and methodical. And so you just push away and smear and move around the paint until the aesthetic is left that you're satisfied with.
I definitely like how it looks. When you use an airbrush, it is pretty uniform, and that kind of gives off more of an animated look. And you're exactly right. Pushing this off definitely makes it look more realistic. And the idea to use a thinner or a cleaner for that type of paint is just genius for this.
I think it really works well, especially with all of these crevices, all of these panel lines, all of these hard corners that would be really difficult to get actual dirt out. So you can take advantage of that.
And with just a crinkled up paper towel, you get a lot of that good texturing in too.
You're exactly right.
You get random patterns and makes it a lot less uniform, which is what you want for something like weathering.
Yeah, so I did this all over the helmet. Any sort of hard corner, any sort of section that will be too flat, that would be moving on to another panel or something like that. Stuff that would just, where dirt would naturally gather. You're trying to create a realistic result with something that you're very purposefully doing.
And with a helmet like this, there's a lot of those hard creases and panels and all that going on.
And that's why this was so fun. And if you want to really accentuate it, that's when you start getting some oil paints involved, just dabbing those in the corners and smearing it and just getting dirt buildup to the extent that you want. And in this case, light to medium.
Yeah, I think you absolutely nailed it.
And so once we're finished with that and you're completely satisfied, that's when you just want to make sure that none of this gets wiped away anymore. So just finish it with the clear coat of your choice. In this case, we just went with a standard matte clear coat to just seal everything in.
Right. We didn't want a gloss or anything like that to it. Not really a fan of the shiny look of clones myself. I prefer a good matte clone. How about you?
I absolutely agreed. And it completely matches the Halo aesthetic as well, which is definitely more standard, matte, mechanical. Exactly. And so we left that to cure for about 24 hours. And then we need to get the iconic gold visor that is known for Halo.
Right. One last thing to do. What have you got here?
So I got one of our 3D printed visor templates. And this allows us to get an exact shape onto a replacement Hobart welding visor. I used an outline using just some silver Sharpie, so it was nice and clear to cut. And I went as close as possible to exactly on the shape, because this shape will perfectly match the visor holders that are inside each of our 3D printed helmets.
Right. That's the idea, that you can print out this template. It takes like an hour to print out, and then you can pretty easily cut out a visor that will fit the helmet pretty well.
At that point, we are ready to apply our gold tint. I just traced around this visor template just roughly, and then cut out our gold material. Now, when this is applied, it will be really sticky. So the way that you fix that is using a spray bottle with kitchen soap and water. That will allow it to slip around and get any air bubbles out.
And this is just kind of a basic privacy film. Like, people put it up on their windows just so people can't see in, but you can still see out. And in this case, we got a gold coloring. So the sticky side is on the silver side, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so that means that when it's applied, it will stick. You want to make sure that you test out the bend, because of course this is going to curve. Mm-hmm. And then I just use a popsicle stick. That's what you Americans call it.
Yeah.
And I scrape out all that water that will help get rid of any bubbles, and then just trim the excess. And then you can apply your nice gold tinted visor in the proper halo aesthetic, which I think makes this helmet truly pop.
Oh yeah, I like it a lot better than just maybe a standard black. It definitely helps it lean a little bit more towards halo. You know, there's kind of a tug of war between different design elements of this helmet, and I feel like they just blend together so seamlessly.
Oh yeah, it nearly went too far towards Star Wars, and this absolutely brought it back.
That is an absolutely beautiful helmet. I love it. I'm honestly glad that we're not going to be submitting it, because I feel like we'd have a pretty good chance in the competition. But
oh, you mean I don't get to enter this?
No, you do not. But I am looking forward to seeing all of you guys' submissions. Remember to check out all the links in the description for either the 3D models, the 3D prints, the Patreon competition, or Wernissage, the original concept artist. I hope you all enjoyed this kind of shorter form video. Remember, at the point of this release, you have about 2 weeks left in the competition. So, Jamie, how long did it take you when you had the print to finish this helmet?
It took me approximately 3 days, I would say, and that is from a raw print all the way to the finished product you see today.
Right.
So if you start now, you can have time to get involved in this competition and potentially win these incredible prizes.
Yeah, so you've still got time. Get those printers going, and I wish you all good luck. I hope you enjoyed watching. I hope you maybe learned some new techniques for finishing your own helmets. And as always, I hope to see you again in the next video.